Welcome to the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. Every week, you'll hear strategies for building your online service-based business your way. And now, here's your host, veteran freelancer, author, and TEDx speaker, Laura Briggs.
Hey listeners, thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. I have wanted to have some guests on the show to talk about today's issue for quite a while. It is a major source of confusion among freelancers. I get asked about it often. I would like to learn how I can get more involved in being a voice for what I do and on behalf of the freelancers that I work with as well. And so we're going to be talking today about some of the recent changes, what I would call like the interest that legislators have started to take in the gig economy and how important it is that we understand what they're doing and trying to do and how we can best explain what we do and what things work for us and what things may have unintended, what my old master's thesis advisor used to call unintended political consequences when they make decisions. So my guests today are Kavin and Jen Singer. I'm going to have you both introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit more about the work that you're currently doing on behalf of these issues.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kavin. I am one of the co-founders of Fight for Freelancers, which is a nonpartisan, self-funded, grassroots, ad hoc coalition. We have to say all those words or people accuse us of being all kinds of things that we're not. We're a bunch of freelancers who have gotten together to try to fight anti-freelancer laws is who we are. I have been a full-time freelance writer and editor since 2003, so almost 20 years now. That's by choice. I was a staff editor for about 10 years in newspapers and magazines before that. I much prefer being a freelancer. I'd like to keep it that way. And I'd like to not have any laws that make it impossible for me to keep the career I just spent all these years building up.
Yeah. Welcome.
And I am Jen Singer. I'm also a co-founder of Fight for Freelancers. I am a freelance writer, and I've been at it since 1994, back when we barely had email. I actually had a client ask me if UPS would deliver to my house. Like, yeah, I'm pretty sure they will. And I've been freelancing because first I did it as a married mom, then as a divorced mom. So it gave me the flexibility for raising my kids and having them run through my office while I was working. And also being ill. I have now have heart failure from COVID. I have survived cancer. And actually being a freelancer is the answer for a lot of people who have chronic and acute illnesses.
Well, welcome. Thank you both for coming on the show, but also for the proactive steps you've already taken on behalf of all of us, because every freelancer needs to be educated about these issues, understand what's going on, not let other people make the decisions for us and tell us what's going to happen without having a say. And I resonate a lot with what you all are saying because I've been freelancing since 2012. And even then, when I started, people did not understand what it was. I had a professor tell me that he didn't want me to come talk to his class because freelancing wasn't a real career. And I was like, well, the IRS definitely thinks this is real because they're making me pay taxes on this. So, it's just very interesting. Like, even still, you find people that have that perception that freelancers have been forced into it. They can't get a good job because the economy is bad. And a lot of times we choose it. So I'm curious for both of you, how have you seen freelancing change since you got started doing this?
Yeah. Do you want me to start, Kim, since I'm been doing it the longest?
Yeah,
great.
Please.
Yeah. When I first started freelancing, it really was, just the idea of working from home, I was an oddity. I had a neighbor say to me, I couldn't do that. I'd be out playing golf every day. And I thought, well, then your business would shut down within a week. I loved being home. I loved being my own boss. I still do. And it's been amazing to me to watch in what is almost 30 years, because of technology, how much has changed and how much has given us the ability to do things that we couldn't do before. I was a mom blogger for a while, and I started before there was Facebook, before there was Twitter. Basically, my mom handed out cards to mothers at the mall, and that's how it started. And now, because of all of the technological changes, my own son, who's 25 and an excellent illustrator, has started his own business and carrying this forward, which is gives me even more of a reason to fight for our rights.
Absolutely. Awesome.
I agree with everything Jen just said, but here's the thing, Laura, what you said really hits home with me too, because to this day, people still think a lot of those misconceptions that you outlined are true. And I have a neighbor who, when this whole thing started with the anti-freelancer laws and I started posting about it on Facebook, she said to me, I didn't even know someone like you could exist. And you think that sounds crazy, but then we go and talk to lawmakers. They also do not realize that people like us exist. And that is what is so frustrating about the whole current situation is there are now more of us than people know what to do with. Freelancing is, every study shows it's on the rise, and that the vast majority of us are choosing this and we like this and we want to stay this way. And the misperception among the people trying to make these anti-freelancer laws is exactly what you said, that we're somehow being exploited or forced into it, or we're confused, or this or that and the other thing. So I think a lot of what you said is still unfortunately accurate, and it's something we're working to change.
Awesome. So let's dig into that. Let's assume that a listener has no idea about anything that's going on with current legislation, proposed legislation, the perception of freelancing by lawmakers. What I see happening is what tends to happen when there's something new that makes a lot of money and is potentially confusing. It reminds me of digital currency and Bitcoin and everything going on with that. The government gets interested, right? What is this all about? How do we make sure people aren't being exploited? How do we make sure everybody's, paying what they need to, has the right licenses and all of that kind of thing? Can you give us, perhaps Jen, we'll start with you, kind of a lay of the land. What do you mean when you talk about legislation that is harmful to freelancers? What does that look like today in 2022?
You know what? I'm going to toss it over to Kim because Kim's got it down to a soundbite that's better than mine.
Let's do it.
No problem. So when the government tries to figure out whether you're an employee or a freelancer, the lingo is employee or an independent contractor. They have to use some kind of a test to determine that. If you fall on one side of the test, you're an employee who should get things like workers' comp and overtime and stuff like that. If you come out on the other side of the test, you're an independent contractor who is entitled to make her own choices and set her own hours and all those other kinds of things. What's been happening is a very big push to try and change that test in a way that many, many legitimate freelancers cannot pass. And we become misclassified as employees, which means the people who hire us are then subject to all kinds of state regulatory fines and problems. It started in 2019 in California. It went into effect in January of 2020 in California. They passed this thing called Assembly Bill 5. The lingo to remember is it's based on something called the ABC test. And this ABC test is one of those determining tests where if you can pass it, if you go through A, B, and C of this test and you answer one way, you're an employee. If you go through A, B, and C another way, you're an independent contractor. ABC has been around for almost 100 years. But it has now been adjusted in a way that, from our perspective, weaponizes it and makes it impossible for a lot of legitimate independent contractors to pass. They specifically changed Part B of it so that Part B now says, if you are in the same line of work as the company paying you, by definition, you have to be an employee. You can no longer be an independent contractor. So if you're an accountant at tax time who pitches in with an accounting firm, maybe for 20 hours a week to make a little extra money, you can no longer do that as a freelancer. If you're a writer submitting articles to magazines, newspapers, can no longer do that as a freelancer. There are hundreds and hundreds of professions, things like nurses, traveling nurses who are independent contractors who show up at hospitals during COVID surges, can no longer do that as an independent. Now you have to be an employee. We don't want to be employees. These companies don't want us to be employees. We're not working at a level that should make us employees, but by law, we become employees. And what they said would happen in California when they did this was that all these companies would magically turn us all into employees and the world would be a wonderful, better place because employees can be unionized. So we could all form unions and go back to the 1950s and life would be grand. What actually happened was 0 new unions were formed. There was 0 evidence of any widespread conversion of independent contractors to employees. The only documented effect of that law, that ABC test law in California, was independent contractors losing their clients. Their clients just dumped them because they didn't want to take the legal risk. And so the state had to go in and pass an emergency ballot measure less than a year later, exempting more than 100 professions. They're working on another one now to exempt even more professions. The voters came in and said, we don't even want you to do this to people like Uber and Lyft drivers. They want to be independent too. Leave them alone. The world is screaming no to this.
Yeah.
But the government is screaming yes. And it's because union leaders are demanding it. They want more of us in employee relationships because by law, then we can be unionized. That's where it's coming from. They're trying to grow unions. We're trying to say, leave us alone. We shouldn't be employees.
Yeah. And there's so many problems with this, but it feel like some of the push when it started, seeming sure that pressure is coming from the unions, and that makes a lot of sense. I feel like some of the legislators bought into this because there was concern about cases in which companies are purposefully misclassifying people to avoid having to pay things like the workers' comp insurance and follow all of the employee laws and do all of the protections that you'd get as an employee. And there are companies out there that do that are intentionally going, how can we skirt the line? However, for a lot of us freelancers, that is not what our clients are doing. Our clients are saying, listen, we don't want you to be an employee. We understand you don't want to be an employee. We have structured this arrangement where you are providing services or deliverables that very much in our mind meet the definition of what an independent contractor does, owning their own time, setting their schedule, using their own equipment to do these things. But this confusion around it has, and also like the attempts to lump in all other kinds of independent contractors like Uber and Lyft drivers, where there's different issues going on, it generally creates a lot of confusion. And I think you're absolutely right. I think what happens, and I've seen this happen in the remote work world too, any state where the laws are difficult, the company just says, we're not hiring employees in California. We're not hiring them in Illinois. The taxes are too much. The paperwork is too much. The legal risk is too much. So we're going to cover ourselves by just saying, we will hire you from these other states. But what I don't think a lot of these legislators necessarily realize is how quickly that shuts things down for people who were making a living being in that location before. And now their clients are saying, I can't work with you just because you're in California. And I don't want to find myself in the midst of a lawsuit. So can you tell me, how did you two get involved with advocating for this issue?
Yeah. So it's 2019. We see this thing happening in California. The bill had been passed. Assembly Bill 5, AB 5 had been passed and was going to go into effect on January 1st, 2020. And here in New Jersey, which is where Kim and I are, we saw them, the local government in Trenton, trying to push a similar ABC test law through a lame duck session and thought that they could sneak it in. But we were sure to make that not happen. We created Fight for Freelancers. We created a Facebook page. My son, the illustrator, made our logo for us. We gathered as many people in New Jersey, and we could have just done writers and just protected writers, but we wanted to protect all freelancers, even though we're writers. And we gathered together and we went to Trenton and told them in 4 hours of testimony why this is a bad idea for us, how this would put us out of business. We didn't yet have proof of what was going to happen in California, but we were warning them what would happen there would happen in New Jersey. Well, long story short, we stopped that bill in New Jersey. And the way that we did it was through the testimony, through op-eds. We're writers. Never anger a man who buys his ink by the barrel, Mark Twain. embarrassed them because they were in the Philadelphia Inquirer and in the New Jersey newspapers. And we flooded our local state senators and our assembly people's offices, their voicemails, their emails, to show them how strongly we felt about this. And it stopped it. Mm-hmm. And then wouldn't you know, not even a week later, we saw it pop up in Congress. Mm-hmm. So now our fight became national.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's important to note, I think, so people listening understand, we were just friends who got together at a diner once a month to talk about writing. We were just a bunch of freelance writers who saw some of our fellow freelance writers losing clients out in California. And we just thought, well, we don't want this to happen to us. And one of our friends got the idea to write an op-ed. She knew somebody at the Philadelphia Inquirer. Most of us had never written an op-ed in our lives. And she sent it in. They ran it, and her op-ed was basically, hey, leave me alone. I'm not exploited. I'm fine. Don't pass this. And the response to that op-ed was vicious. The AFL-CIO their lawyers sent letters to every lawmaker in Trenton saying, ignore these people. They don't matter. Don't listen to this. She got phone calls from them. So we all thought, okay, well, we must have accidentally hit a bullseye. Let's do more of that. And we blanketed the state because we can write. We figured out how to write op-eds. We made a website. One of our other friends knew how to use MailChimp. We built a database of every lawmaker in the state and started sending out press releases. And we started making videos. And anybody who knew how to do anything, we just did it to try to educate these lawmakers until Jen said they were so embarrassed about what they were doing. They were trying to kind of put it through in the dark when nobody was paying attention around Christmas time. And we shined a lot of light, and that's why it changed. And it calmed down in New Jersey when COVID kicked up. Yeah. But then what happened was we had the national elections, as Jen said, and everything has been really heated up at the federal level. What has happened is the big plan that the AFL-CIO had was to do a state-by-state rollout. It was supposed to go California, New Jersey, New York. They got it through in California. We stopped it in New Jersey, and New York got so scared when they saw what was happening in California and New Jersey that they pulled back on the bill. That should have been the end of it. But then when everything changed over in Washington and the Democratic Party took control of everything, the unions are very big supporters of Democrats. And we try not to make this a political issue, but this is just what happened. The AFL-CIO said, well, forget about the state-by-state strategy. Let's just try to do it to everybody in the whole country. That's their new strategy, while they have a party in power that will work with them. So we immediately saw the PRO Act, which is the Protecting the Right to Organize Act. It has this ABC test right at the top of page 1. We have seen the U.S. Department of Labor rescind its rule, how it determines who an independent contractor is. They're getting ready to put forward a new rule. The head of the U.S. Department of Labor now is former union organizer Marty Walsh. We know exactly what he's going to do. The National Labor Relations Board has tried to they're reopening a case where they put out a request for amicus briefs in December saying, what rule should we use going forward? We actually learned how to write and file amicus briefs. I didn't even know how to say amicus brief, but Fight for Freelancers filed one to the National Labor Relations Board. We got co-signers representing more than 250,000 freelancers around the country saying, don't do this to us. There are now court cases against the state of California that have made their way through the system and are now headed to the U.S. Supreme Court. And we just filed an amicus brief in one of those cases, now representing more than 275,000 Americans, saying, please, justices of the Supreme Court, take this case. We would love to see you rule it unconstitutional so that we can stop this madness already. Anybody who thinks this is not a threat to them is not paying attention, because they very clearly want this to happen and they're not going to stop. So we have to stop them. And the way that we have been doing that, as Jen was saying, you have to stand up and make your voices heard. Like, as you were saying, Laura, these lawmakers don't know who we are. When we would sit down, to this day, when we sit down with lawmakers and we say, this is how we make money and what we do, they say, wow, I didn't know that was even a thing. It doesn't occur to them. What they're hearing is coming from groups like the AFL-CIO that are saying, this is all about Uber drivers and they're so exploited and we have to make their lives better. Nobody's talking about the financial advisors, the graphic artists, the kitchen designers, all the different kinds of people who work as independent contractors. So we encourage everybody to come join us. It's so strange to be going up against union organizers and sit here and say, we need to get a little better organized as independent contractors. But that's what actually has to happen. And that's what we've been doing. And we've got a pretty good critical mass now, but we need to get louder. We need to get more.
Yeah. So let's chat about that. A freelancer's listening to this episode is concerned for themselves, but also wants to be a part of that bigger movement. What is the next step that you all are really seeing as what do you need in terms of help getting organized and really sharing that voice? Because I think a lot of us feel, we're kind of isolated. Like we may have a network of freelance friends, but a lot of people don't understand what we do. My in-laws used to describe what I do as something on the internet, which was accurate, but I was like, it's very questionable. Let's not say that to everybody. But how do we get involved in a way that does share the reality of who we are and what we want? And the fact that I didn't even know about this being such a heavy union push. So I'd love to know, how can people who are listening to this episode take that next action step?
So there are basically two different ways you can do this, or two avenues that you could take, and or both. And one is at the state level and one is at the national level. So if you have no idea who your state senator is and who your assembly people are, you have one state senator and two assembly people. These are the names that you see on your ballots in the fall, and you go, who the heck are they? Find out who the heck are they. And I would send them emails, and we'll give you information on what to say and down the road, but send them emails, get to know them, explain what the ABC test is, because this all starts in very small areas of the country and then spreads like COVID, and you got to stop it as soon as you can. So, and if you can get to know your local government, then also find out who your senators are in your state and who your congressperson is in your region, and do the same thing. Now, if you're in a state where, like New Jersey, New York, California, Massachusetts, Illinois, where they have tried to put the ABC test into legislation, we at Fight for Freelancers have separate state groups for each of those, but we also have the umbrella National Fight for Freelancers USA. Come to Facebook, join our groups, go to our website, and you can go to fightforfreelancersusa.com. We're .com, right?
Yeah.
Kim? Yes, .com. And that's where you can read up everything you need to know. It is confusing at times to understand what we're talking about, which is why it's hard to get it down to a simple soundbite. And we appreciate the opportunity to talk about it at length. You can learn what the 3 prongs of ABC test are. You can find out what happened in California and share that with your legislators. You can find, we've ghostwritten letters to send. We post all of our op-eds, so you can get an idea if you're a writer or if you like to write. Send an op-ed to your local newspaper. It doesn't have to be the New York Times, who won't run us anyway. It can be your local newspaper, and that is what your legislator is going to see. If you write about how these tests will put you out of business, they'll start paying attention.
Yeah.
And then get all of your freelancer friends to join you and do the same. So many people hear it and ignore it. And even on my own Facebook page, I've been doing this for 2 years. It'll be like crickets. Nobody will, my cousin who's a banker, he's not even a freelancer, will click, yay on it. And that's it. But I know people are reading it. So the more you explain, the better. We do have these great videos that Kim put together that explain everything in simple ways that you can share also with your legislators and with your fellow freelancers.
I'm so thankful to both of you for coming on the show today, digging into what is a complex issue a little bit more. And I also think it's so important for every freelancer listening. You cannot afford to take a back seat in this one. Someone else will tell the story of what they think you do, probably incorrectly, if you do not stand up and take a voice. And I think so many of us have had to do that in our personal lives. We've had to explain to our friends, to our family members, yes, this is what I do. It's legitimate. I choose to do it. I love what I do. I don't want to be an employee. But think about the fact of how much farther removed people in your state Senate, your state assemblies, the national government are. They're 20, 30 years behind on a lot of issues sometimes. So they really don't understand what you do. You have to be part of that story. So even if it's a small action step of writing a letter, getting something placed in your newsletter, learning who your representatives are, you need to do it, because what we all cannot afford is to let somebody else make these decisions on our behalf. And then we're in a much more difficult position where it's passed, it's happening, and all of our clients are just saying, hey, I can't take the risk, I'm out. So I want to thank you both so much for coming on the show today. Very valuable episode, and I am really excited to share this.
Thanks so much, Laura.
We're excited to have been here.